picture this: a quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone knows everyone. A place where life moves at a steady, predictable pace, and the biggest excitement is a backyard barbecue or a neighborhood garage sale. It's the kind of place where doors are left unlocked, and the idea of danger feels like something from a faraway world. Now imagine one house on that street. A modest home with neatly trimmed hedges, flower beds bursting with color, and a garden that looks like it belongs in a magazine. Inside, a couple is living out their golden years. Roscoe Christopher, 65 years old, a man of routine and quiet habits. His wife, Leslie, 62, warm, cheerful, and loved by everyone who knew her. They'd been married for over 4 decades, a lifetime spent together, raising children, sharing dreams, and building a life. But one ordinary evening, that picture-perfect life came to an abrupt, unimaginable end. The call came into the police station just after 9 p.m. A frantic neighbor reported screams coming from the Christopher home, followed by an eerie silence. When officers arrived, they found Leslie Christopher lifeless on the living room floor. The scene was unsettling, but it was what they discovered next that sent chills through even the most seasoned investigators. A handwritten note, left on the coffee table, with words so strange and out of place that they would haunt everyone involved in the case for years to come. What could drive a 65-year-old man to end the life of the woman he had shared everything with? What kind of reasoning could lead to such a terrible act? And what was the meaning behind that note? Today, we uncover the shocking truth behind the murder of Leslie Christopher. A story of love, trust, and a motive that no one saw coming. The Christophers' home sat on a peaceful cul-de-sac, the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to happen. Nestled among other modest houses, its beige siding and white shutters blended seamlessly into the neighborhood. The lawn was impeccably manicured, and a small garden along the driveway brimmed with vibrant flowers, Leslie's pride and joy. It was late October, and the crisp chill of fall was in the air, a reminder that winter was just around the corner. That evening, the street was quiet. Most of the houses were dark, their occupants already settled in for the night. A single streetlight flickered faintly, casting long, distorted shadows across the pavement. The faint hum of cicadas filled the air, a rhythmic background to the distant rumble of thunder. Inside the Christophers' home, the scene was equally unremarkable at first glance. The living room was tidy, the furniture neatly arranged, and a collection of framed family photos lined the mantel. The scent of lavender lingered faintly in the air, a result of Leslie's fondness for candles. But on closer inspection, there were signs that something was amiss. The rain had just begun to drizzle, creating small puddles on the driveway where the couple's car was parked. Water droplets tapped gently against the windows, a sound that would have been soothing under different circumstances. The lights inside the house were on, but the curtains were drawn tightly, concealing the horrors that lay within. At 8:45 p.m., a neighbor named Margaret had been outside collecting her laundry from the line when she heard it, a piercing scream, sharp enough to cut through the calm of the evening. She froze, the damp sheets forgotten in her hands. Then, just as quickly as it started, the scream was silenced. What followed was an unsettling stillness, the kind that makes your skin crawl and your instincts scream at you that something isn't right. Margaret hesitated for a moment before rushing back into her home to call the police. She could only say one thing when the dispatcher asked what had happened. "Something terrible is going on at the Christophers' house." When officers arrived at 9:10 p.m., the house appeared undisturbed from the outside. No signs of forced entry, no shattered windows, just that same quiet, unassuming home. But as they stepped inside, the air seemed heavier, colder. The living room was where they found her. Leslie Christopher lay on the floor, her head resting at an unnatural angle, her arms splayed out as if she had been reaching for something, or someone. Shards of glass from a shattered vase surrounded her, glittering like tiny daggers in the dim light. On the coffee table sat a piece of paper, folded neatly in half. It wasn't crumpled, rushed, or chaotic. Instead, it was placed there deliberately, almost ceremoniously. The words scrawled on it were strange, unsettling, and cryptic. "The curse is broken." The officers exchanged uneasy glances as they secured the scene. The storm outside grew louder, thunder rolling in the distance as the rain began to fall in earnest. It felt as though the house itself was mourning. Roscoe Christopher was found upstairs, sitting on the edge of the bed in his room. His hands rested calmly in his lap, and his face was expressionless. When asked what had happened, he simply said, "It's over now." The officers didn't know what to make of his words. Was this a confession? A declaration of relief? Or something else entirely? As they led him out of the house in handcuffs, Roscoe didn't resist. He didn't ask any questions or try to explain himself. He simply walked, head bowed, through the rain-soaked night. The crime scene, though orderly at first glance, was riddled with contradictions, small details that didn't seem to fit. Why was the note placed so deliberately? Why had Leslie screamed, yet Roscoe remained calm? And what could he possibly mean by, "The curse is broken"? As investigators began their work, it became clear that this was no ordinary case. Every new detail would only deepen the mystery, unraveling a story no one could have anticipated. To understand the tragedy that unfolded that night, we must first understand the people at the heart of it. Leslie Christopher was 62 years old. A retired schoolteacher, she had spent her life shaping young minds and inspiring her students to dream bigger than the small town they grew up in. Leslie had a way of making everyone feel special. Whether it was a struggling student or a neighbor going through a tough time, she always found a way to lend a hand. After retiring, Leslie poured her energy into the community. She volunteered at local charities, organized food drives, and even helped start a literacy program at the library. Her passion, however, was her garden. It was a masterpiece of color and life, a sanctuary where she spent hours tending to flowers, herbs, and vegetables. She once told a friend, "There's something magical about watching things grow. It reminds me that even in the hardest times, there's beauty to be found." Her warmth and generosity made her beloved in the neighborhood. But behind the smiles and the acts of kindness, Leslie's life wasn't as perfect as it seemed. Friends had noticed that in recent months she seemed quieter, more withdrawn. She brushed it off, saying she was tired or preoccupied with her garden. No one could have guessed the storm that was brewing behind closed doors. Roscoe Christopher, Leslie's husband of over 40 years, was a stark contrast to her vibrant personality. At 65, Roscoe was a man of routine. A retired accountant, he was meticulous, quiet, and reserved. He wasn't the type to strike up a conversation at the grocery store or join in at neighborhood gatherings. While Roscoe's demeanor could come across as cold, those who knew him described him as steady and reliable. He was the kind of man who always paid his bills on time, kept his lawn neatly trimmed, and never missed a doctor's appointment. But there was another side to Roscoe, one that only Leslie seemed to know. Neighbors occasionally noticed Roscoe's peculiar habits. He would spend hours in his basement, working on what he called projects, though no one ever saw the results. He was also known for his superstitions. He avoided walking under ladders, kept a horseshoe above the garage door, and refused to plant anything in the backyard, saying it was bad luck. Despite his quirks, Roscoe and Leslie seemed to complement each other. She brought warmth and light to their marriage, while he provided stability and order. But as the years went on, cracks began to show. The lead detective on the case was Detective Eleanor Carter, a 15-year veteran of the force. Known for her sharp instincts and no-nonsense approach, Carter had solved her fair share of difficult cases. But even she admitted that something about this one felt off. When Carter first arrived at the Christophers' home, she immediately noticed the contradictions. The crime scene was eerily calm, no signs of a struggle beyond the broken vase, no blood, no signs of forced entry. The handwritten note on the coffee table was unlike anything she had seen before. Her initial impression of Roscoe was equally puzzling. He didn't seem panicked, remorseful, or angry. Instead, he was calm, almost detached, as if he were an observer rather than a participant in the tragedy. When Carter asked him what had happened, he simply said, "You'll see." Carter couldn't shake the feeling that Roscoe knew more than he was letting on. But was he a cold-blooded killer, Or was there something else at play? As she began to dig into the couple's lives, she quickly realized that this case would be anything but straightforward. October 22nd began like any other day for Leslie and Roscoe Christopher. Leslie, an early riser, was up with the sun. She spent her morning at the local farmer's market, chatting with vendors and picking out fresh produce for the week. Several people remembered seeing her there, smiling and exchanging pleasantries as she carried a wicker basket filled with apples, squash, and a small bouquet of sunflowers. Back at home, Roscoe was unusually quiet. He didn't accompany Leslie to the market, which wasn't unusual, he rarely did. But neighbors noted that he didn't come outside that morning, even to retrieve the newspaper, something he always did without fail. Leslie returned home around 11 a.m., her arms full of groceries and flowers. A neighbor, Margaret, the same one who later called the police, saw her unloading the car and waved. Leslie smiled and waved back before disappearing into the house. For the rest of the afternoon, the neighborhood was quiet. Leslie spent time in her garden, watering her plants and pulling a few weeds. Margaret saw her again around 3 p.m. and commented later that Leslie seemed cheerful, as she always did. But by 6 p.m., things began to take a strange turn. Roscoe, who typically kept to himself, was seen pacing in the front yard. He looked agitated, glancing at his watch repeatedly. A passing neighbor asked if everything was all right, and Roscoe simply nodded before retreating back into the house. By 8:30 p.m., the street was dark, and most of the neighbors had settled in for the night. That's when Margaret heard the scream. When officers arrived at the Christophers' home, the scene was both chilling and perplexing. Leslie's lifeless body lay in the living room, surrounded by shards of broken glass from the vase that had fallen during the altercation. The room was otherwise undisturbed, no overturned furniture, no signs of a struggle. The cause of death was immediately apparent: blunt force trauma to the back of Leslie's head. A bloodied fireplace poker was found nearby, its position suggesting it had been hastily discarded. But it wasn't just the physical evidence that baffled investigators. It was the note. The handwritten note, placed neatly on the coffee table, was just 3 words long. "The curse is broken." Detective Carter studied the note carefully. The handwriting was steady and deliberate, not rushed or panicked. It seemed out of place, almost calculated. The words themselves were strange, cryptic and open to interpretation. What curse? What did it mean? The initial theory was a domestic dispute that had escalated into violence. But the note hinted at something far more complex, something that couldn't be explained by a simple argument or moment of rage. As investigators began piecing together the timeline, they realized there was more to the Christophers' seemingly quiet life than met the eye. What was the meaning behind the note? Was it a confession, a message, or something else entirely? And why had Roscoe Christopher remained so calm, almost detached, in the aftermath of his wife's death? The answers would take detectives down a path filled with secrets, lies, and a motive that no one could have anticipated. As investigators combed through the Christophers' home, they began to piece together a picture of the crime, but the details only raised more questions. The note found on the coffee table read, "The curse is broken." It was written on plain white paper, folded neatly, and placed with care. Forensic analysis later confirmed that the handwriting matched Roscoe's. But what did it mean? Detective Carter's team found several references to the curse throughout the house. In Roscoe's study, tucked away in a drawer, was a leather-bound notebook filled with cryptic entries. One page stood out. "The garden thrives, but the curse lingers. It must end before it consumes us both." The garden, a source of joy for Leslie, seemed to hold a darker significance for Roscoe. Neighbors later revealed that Roscoe had always been uneasy about the backyard. He refused to step foot in it and avoided discussing it altogether. When questioned, Roscoe claimed he had been asleep upstairs during the time of the murder. He insisted he had no knowledge of what had happened until the police arrived. But his alibi didn't hold up under scrutiny. The Christophers' bedroom showed no signs of recent use. The bed was neatly made, and there were no signs that Roscoe had been resting there. Adding to the suspicion, A neighbor reported hearing raised voices coming from the Christophers' home earlier that evening. Margaret, the same neighbor who called the police, described it as a heated argument. While she couldn't make out the words, she was certain it was Leslie's voice she heard, followed by Roscoe's. The fireplace poker, identified as the murder weapon, bore Roscoe's fingerprints. However, there were no defensive wounds on Leslie's body, suggesting she may have been struck unexpectedly. This contradicted the neighbor's account of an argument, adding another layer of mystery. At first, investigators considered the possibility of a break-in. The Christophers' home had no security cameras, and the front door was unlocked when police arrived. Could someone have entered, killed Leslie, and left unnoticed? However, nothing appeared to be missing. Leslie's jewelry, wallet, and other valuables were untouched. There were no signs of forced entry, and the house was remarkably undisturbed. This theory was quickly dismissed. Neighbors described Roscoe and Leslie as a quiet couple, but some hinted that their marriage wasn't as perfect as it seemed. One neighbor recalled overhearing Leslie say, "I can't keep doing this," during a conversation with Roscoe a few weeks prior. Detective Carter's team discovered that Leslie had recently inquired about a divorce lawyer. While she hadn't taken any formal steps, the inquiry suggested she was considering ending the marriage. Could this have been the motive? Roscoe's calm demeanor after the crime, coupled with his refusal to explain the note, only fueled suspicions. But if this was a crime of passion, why the cryptic message? The most puzzling aspect of the case was Roscoe's fixation on superstitions. His journals were filled with references to bad omens and breaking the cycle. Detectives interviewed Roscoe's sister, who revealed a troubling detail from their childhood. Roscoe had grown up in a household steeped in superstition. Their mother believed the family was cursed, and Roscoe seemed to have internalized this belief. The garden, which Leslie loved so much, appeared to be a focal point of Roscoe's paranoia. He often referred to it as the source in his writings. One journal entry read, "It grows, it thrives, but it takes from us. She doesn't see it, but I do. It must end." Had Roscoe convinced himself that the garden was somehow tied to the curse he believed in? Could he have seen Leslie's devotion to it as a threat? As the investigation deepened, it became clear that this case was anything but ordinary. The evidence pointed in multiple directions, each more unsettling than the last. Was this the tragic result of a marriage unraveling? Or was there something far stranger at play, something rooted in Roscoe's long-standing fears and beliefs? The answers lay in the final pieces of evidence yet to be uncovered. Before the tragedy that ended her life, Leslie Christopher was a woman who left an indelible mark on everyone she met. One of her former students, now a successful writer, shared a story that captured Leslie's essence. "I was a shy kid," he recalled. "The kind of kid who'd sit in the back of the class and hope no one noticed me. But Mrs. Christopher noticed. She handed me a journal one day and said, 'Write your thoughts here. You might be surprised by what you find.' That journal changed my life. It's the reason I became a writer." Leslie had a knack for seeing potential in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. Her impact extended beyond the classroom. At the local food bank, she was known as the heart of the operation. She didn't just organize donations, she made connections, remembering everyone's name and story. Her garden, a vibrant sanctuary filled with roses, lavender, and tomatoes, wasn't just a personal hobby, it was a gift to the community. Leslie often invited neighbors over, offering them fresh produce and advice on how to start their own gardens. She could make anything grow, Margaret, her neighbor, said with a tearful smile. It was like she had magic in her hands. But while Leslie brought life and light to those around her, Roscoe saw something entirely different. As investigators dug deeper into Roscoe's journals and interviewed those who knew him, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Roscoe's obsession with superstitions had grown over the years, consuming his thoughts and influencing his actions. The garden, which Leslie cherished, became a symbol of Roscoe's fears. In his mind, it wasn't just a garden, it was the source of the curse he believed plagued their lives. His journals were filled with cryptic entries. The flowers bloom, but they take something in return. I can feel it. She doesn't see it, but it's there. It's always been there. The curse will consume us if I don't act. Roscoe's sister revealed that his paranoia about curses dated back to their childhood. Their mother, deeply superstitious, often blamed misfortunes on bad omens and dark forces. Roscoe, the eldest child, seemed to internalize these beliefs the most. In the weeks leading up to Leslie's death, Roscoe's behavior became increasingly erratic. He began avoiding the garden entirely, refusing to even look at it. He would mutter under his breath about breaking the cycle and ending it once and for all. On the night of the murder, Roscoe later confessed he had been fixated on the idea that the garden, and by extension, Leslie's devotion to it, was the source of their problems. He claimed he had tried to reason with her, but she wouldn't listen. I told her it needed to go, Roscoe said during his interrogation. I told her we had to tear it out, but she wouldn't hear it. She said I was being ridiculous. The argument escalated. Roscoe, overcome by years of suppressed paranoia and frustration, grabbed the fireplace poker. In a moment of irrational rage, he struck Leslie. When asked about the note, Roscoe explained, "It was the only way to break the curse. I had to do it. I didn't want to, but I had to." The juxtaposition of Leslie's warmth and Roscoe's descent into irrational fear left the community reeling. How could someone so full of life and love meet such a tragic end at the hands of the person she trusted most? As Detective Carter reflected on the case, she said, "This wasn't just a murder. It was a tragedy on every level. Leslie's life was stolen, and Roscoe's mind was consumed by beliefs he couldn't escape." But as the investigation came to a close, one question lingered: could Roscoe's actions have been prevented? Or was this tragedy inevitable, the result of a lifetime of unaddressed fears and obsessions? As Roscoe Christopher stood trial for the murder of his wife, Leslie, his chilling confession stunned the courtroom. The once quiet, reserved man who had seemed so detached from the crime now spoke with an eerie clarity. "I didn't want to hurt her," Roscoe said, his voice trembling. "But I had to break the curse." The courtroom fell silent. His words hung in the air, a haunting admission that left everyone in the room grappling with the same question. Was Roscoe truly delusional, or was there something more to his actions? The prosecution painted Roscoe as a man driven by irrational fears, consumed by a belief in curses that had clouded his judgment for years. They argued that his obsession with the garden and his superstitions led him to commit an unspeakable act of violence against the woman he had once vowed to love and protect. But as the trial progressed, some began to wonder, was Roscoe simply a victim of his own mind, or was there another layer to this bizarre motive? Detective Carter, who had worked tirelessly on the case, was not convinced by Roscoe's explanation. "He may have believed what he said, but I think there's more to the story," she remarked in an interview. "The way he acted after the murder, his calm demeanor, it doesn't add up. There's something we're missing." Some investigators began to suspect that Roscoe's motive went beyond his obsession with the garden. Could there have been another, darker influence at play? Was there someone else involved in this twisted narrative? But these questions remained unanswered as Roscoe's trial drew to a close. Was Roscoe truly a victim of his own delusions? Or was there a deeper, more sinister reason behind his actions? Could there have been someone else pulling the strings in this tragic story? As the jury deliberated, the mystery of what truly drove Roscoe to kill Leslie Christopher remained unsolved. So, what do you think? Was Roscoe Christopher truly a victim of his own mind, consumed by irrational fears and superstitions? Or is there a deeper, darker truth lurking beneath the surface of this chilling crime? Could there have been someone, or something, else that pushed Roscoe to commit such a horrific act? Or was the curse he believed in just a convenient excuse for a far more sinister motive? We want to hear your thoughts. Do you think Roscoe's obsession with the garden and his strange beliefs were enough to push him over the edge, or is there more to this story than meets the eye? And what about the note he left behind? "The curse is broken." Was that a confession of guilt, Or was it a message meant for someone else entirely? Let us know your theories in the comments below. We'll be reading them and may even feature some of your insights in our next video. And don't forget to subscribe, because we've got more gripping crime stories coming your way. You won't want to miss what we uncover next. In the end, this was the story of a devoted wife, a strange belief, and a crime that left a town forever shaken. Leslie Christopher, beloved by all, was taken from her community in a way no one could have predicted. And Roscoe Christopher, the man who vowed to love her, found himself at the center of a tragedy driven by a belief so powerful it consumed him. Roscoe's story is a stark reminder of how fragile the line between love and tragedy can be. What seemed like a peaceful life for over 4 decades turned into a nightmare rooted in obsession, fear, and a misguided need to protect himself from something he believed to be real. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more gripping stories to light. And we want to hear from you. What do you think really happened? Was Roscoe's belief in the curse enough to drive him to murder? Or was there something more at play? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, if you have a true crime case you'd like us to cover next, drop your suggestions in the comments. We're always on the lookout for the next story that will keep us all guessing.